I was thinking, do I need this?
Well, you can see the stuff better.
We'll go ahead and call the King County Stormwater Management Planning Committee to order.
Is your little green light on?
We'll go ahead and call the King County Stormwater Committee meeting to order. Please call the roll.
Broley,
Here.
Beck, Bo, Burns, Captain,
Here.
Deal, Bates,
Here,
Leonard,
Leonard here.
Sanchez, Linder,
Linder here.
Hennessis,
Hennessis here.
Young,
Hey, Young here. Really loud.
All right, and we do have a quorum. Perfect. Next we'll move on to remote attendance requests. I know we have Mayor Captain online. Is there, do we need a motion?
No,
Or just-
just we can approve his,
right,
he's in the
perfect.
bylaws, he's allowed to fully participate.
Perfect. If there's no objection, welcome Mayor Captain.
so
Perfect. It's so. Item 4 on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the April 12th, 2022 meeting. I'm sure you all remember that. If there's a motion in a second.
Bates would ask for unanimous consent to approve the minutes from April 12th, 2022.
See, we can't even do that in municipal life. So I don't even know what that
So
means.
cool. We can do it.
You guys are cool. All right, unanimous consent. So that's approved. Unless there's any objection. Perfect. Next up, public comment. Is there anybody in-house that wishes to make public comment this afternoon? All right.
Anybody online?
Is there anybody online that wishes to make public comment? All right, hearing none, we'll move on to item 6 today, which is the nomination election of a vice chair. This would be from the county board representatives. Anybody willing to?
Correct. Under our bylaws, the chair and the vice chair have to be from different groups. You are a municipal representative, so the vice chair, which was formerly Dale Berman, who passed away, we would need a nomination for a county board vice chair for this committee.
Mr. Chairman. Yes, I'm Bill Leonard. I would like to nominate Mike Lidner as our vice chair.
He accepted.
Is Mike okay with that?
Okay with that.
Perfect. There's a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Awesome. Any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Welcome, Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you.
We don't have to do a roll call for that, do we?
But you
We
could,
can.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think we should probably should.
Broley,
Yes.
Beck, Bo, Burns, Captain,
Yes.
Deal, Bates,
Yes,
Leonard,
Leonard, yes.
Sanchez, Linder,
Yes.
Hennessis,
Hennessis, yes.
Young.
Hey, Young, yes.
Perfect. That carries unanimously. Moving on to item 7 is a presentation, the background of the stormwater ordinance for new committee members. Staff?
Thank you. Blair, can I just click through on this? Thank you. So we just wanted to give the new members of this committee, we know it's been a long time, even since historic members have met on this committee, a little bit of background. So our stormwater ordinance is a countywide ordinance that was given authority by the state for Kane County to develop a stormwater ordinance. The stormwater committee first started meeting back in 1998, and our first ordinance was passed and effective in 2001. Since that time, there was a number of different changes that were made to the ordinance. They were pretty minor at the time until 2019, when there was a major overhaul of the ordinance. The 2019 revisions really reorganized the ordinance, that it's in a much more user-friendly format. We also coordinated quite significantly with the Farm Bureau and the farmers of Kane County. We have significant land that's in farm ground still. And the development in urbanized areas versus our rural areas, and trying to work through the ordinance to have both of them following the same requirements it was difficult and onerous for our farmers. And so the 2019 ordinance did provide some other measures such as grassed waterways and reconnection to the floodplain that really protects our farm ground and gives our farmers some other options. In the 2019 changes as well, we did recognize that there were some issues between our various communities where stormwater was being discharged into either unincorporated Kane County or to an adjacent community. And there really was lacking a lot of coordination between those communities. And so one of the great things that the 2019 ordinance did was improve this communication, whereas the upstream community is giving that downstream community acknowledgement of this development is going to happen, the water's coming into your area. Do you have any kind of issues with that? So that's been really helpful as we see the 2019 ordinance being implemented. Under our ordinance, while the county has overall authority, myself as the director of the overall stormwater ordinance, most of our communities are certified. And what that means is that each community has a representative within their staff. It's not an elected official, but within their staff that's ultimately responsible for that community's implementation and compliance with the stormwater ordinance. Now, these communities can provide additional requirements on top of our stormwater ordinance, but they can't be less restrictive. They can only be more restrictive. So if a community has a certain flooding issues in a certain area, they might want to restrict down and make them any kind of development store more water. And that would be up to that community. What we like to do when we coordinate with our communities, we have a very strict policy of not speaking to a developer that's developing within a community. We're certainly there as a resource for our community, and we will more than welcome meeting with that community with that developer, but we don't have sidebar conversations with them. We want to make sure that we're all working off the same playing field and that we're all having this discussion in one room together. So that's worked really well as well. In addition to that, we do have our certified wetland specialists as well as our certified engineers. These are folks that are certified through our office to review permits and to issue permits for those communities. So many of our communities don't have staff that actually go through and issue the permits. They have consultants that are hired by the community, and all those folks that are doing that work and reviewing those documents to make sure that they're compliant with the stormwater ordinance are reviewed and their resumes looked at, and we do provide those approvals through our office. So I hope that helps with some background. As you probably figured, this committee is set up with 6 municipal members, 6 county board members. This committee oversees any kind of changes that happen to the stormwater ordinance. Once any changes are recommended by this committee, it does go to the county board executive committee and then to county board for approval. Each member, a municipal and each county board member are in planning districts, and those planning districts are a requirement of the state statute. It requires that we basically take the county apart and looking at the populations in each area, put our municipalities as well as a county board representative into 6 different planning areas. And so we have in each planning area with approximately the same population, we have each planning area that has a county board representative and a municipal representative. So that's kind of the composition of this committee. We also have 2 ex officio members. We have the Kane County Board Chair. We also have the chair of the Kane County Transportation Committee. The other member that's a potential member and certainly up for any kind of discussion from the municipal side of things is an ex officio municipal representative. We don't have one of those right now. So if any of the committee members have any recommendations for us, we can certainly bring that back at the next meeting. The last municipal ex officio member was the City of Aurora Mayor pro tem, I believe. So, did I miss anything? Like background history wise?
Just the BMP trigger was new.
Oh, that's great. Addition to, as Ann points out, myself, Jody Walnick, the Director of Environmental Water Resources. I should do some introductions. This is Ann Wilford, our Stormwater Manager, and she issues most of the permits for unincorporated Kane County as well as our floodplain work. And then we have at the end, Rob Linky, our project engineer and our wetland specialist who oversees the wetland portion of the ordinance. And as Ann points out, yes, one of the big other changes to the 2019 ordinance was a BMP trigger that stands for best management practice. And that's kind of your rain garden type development. And what we were seeing is a lot of challenges with very dense subdivisions where people are putting in a lot of patios, basketball hoops, that kind of stuff where you're increasing the runoff off those areas. And so at 5,000 square foot of new impervious surface, which would be your roofs and your pavements, best management practice is now required under the 2019 ordinance. And so what I'm going to do next, if there are no questions, is we have not done an audit of our communities in quite some time. And so starting this committee back up, as we have not met for about 4 years, we wanted to look at some data and give the members some background on how each community has been implementing the ordinance and any kind of outliers of the information that those communities are kind of looking back to us to provide some assistance and support. Any questions?
Is there's a couple names here who are not present that I don't know. Are any of them from Aurora?
No.
Bo or
Um,
Deal? Is Abby Beck?
Abby Beck is from Batavia.
And Burns is Kevin Burns. Who's Bo and Deal?
What?
Oh,
Sleepy Hollow.
I
Kelly,
didn't know your last.
Kelly Deal is the Village of Lily Lake.
Okay, so there's nobody
Hi,
here
I'm
from
Kim Young.
Aurora.
Kim Young.
Nobody from Aurora though.
Oh, you do? You weren't here in 2020.
Our representative from that planning area is Mr. Broly.
Oh,
I had to arm wrestle the former mayor. That's just how I got here.
okay. I see. All right, thanks.
All right, so I will jump into the audit that was completed then. So why did we want to do an audit? We wanted to allow this committee to see how communities are implementing the stormwater ordinance. And also the results from this audit do help our communities to see how other communities are implementing the ordinance and how they're managing the long-term maintenance of some of those measures. And so it's a great kind of touch point in how are we doing both as, are we all being consistent across the board? And does any community have kind of some really great ideas on how they're managing the long-term maintenance of the stormwater measures that are going in? So it's great information. I think we were really fascinated at the results that came back. And certainly there's definitely some follow-up that we're going to be doing on some of the results. So in total, we have 25 certified communities and all 25 did respond to our audit request. The total stormwater permits issued, and this, remember, is just from the year 2024, is 160. The total Category 1 BMPs, as we just kind of mentioned, those BMPs are your infiltration trenches or your rain gardens, were 49. The number of communities that coordinated with adjacent downstream reviews was 4. And this is what I'd mentioned previously, that talk that's going on between the various communities when they have stormwater that's leaving their municipal boundary or from unincorporated Kane County going into a municipal boundary, that they're getting a look at those stormwater permits before they're actually being issued by those communities. So that's great to see. The communities that collected fee in lieu, and we do allow fee in lieu, which means that maybe the development is a redevelopment and it's really dense and there's just nowhere to put a rain garden on the property. Our communities can collect money, and then in lieu of putting that best management practice, that has to be put in a separate account And that money then can be used to create a larger rain garden for the community that helps solve some drainage problems. So we had one collection of fee and lieu for 2024. Nobody collected any funds for detention in 24. And we did not see any variances to the stormwater ordinance last year or 2024.
Ms. Walnick?
Mhm.
So does detention mean holding your water or getting to have to stay after school?
It would be your it would be your ponds that you're creating,
Okay.
correct?
So it's not a penalty, it's.
Correct. One of the things we were interested in as we're kind of walking through how a permit works is how the inspections of how the work is going on out in the field are coming into these certified communities. And the vast majority of the respondents did note that the field inspection reports are being sent to their community. There was a small number of 13% of them saying that it was in response to an issue that might be a neighbor calling and saying, you know, we just had some rain and there's some muddy water running off of the site. We're concerned about it, where they're supposed to be filtering that water before it leaves their site. So that's more of a complaint driven. And then we have a number of communities that either are collecting the reports and putting them on file or getting emailed reports from those contractors that are doing the work or the consultants. So we were really curious also who's doing these inspections. After a half an inch of rainfall, there's supposed to be inspections as well as a weekly inspection of your silt fences, and your bales and your protection measures that are protecting those inlets and catch basins from getting dirt and debris in them. Who is actually going out and looking at those and making sure that they're being done correctly. And it's fantastic. We're seeing almost 65% of them are being done directly by the municipal staff and or their consulting engineers. There's about 18% that are being done by the owner or the contractor that's actually working on the project. And then we also have a great resource in our area, which is Kane DuPage Soil and Water Conservation District that's doing about 18% of them. And each certified community can contract with them to do that work if it's too much of a workload for them. So they provide a great resource. Long-term maintenance is a big issue with our stormwater basins and our stormwater measures, because if no one's looking at these things and double checking that they're working the way they should, it can cause flooding if there's a flood event and things are blocked or pipes are not working correctly. So of our communities, we had 9 respondents that are performing the maintenance on their stormwater facilities themselves. There's 10 respondents who are collecting the maintenance records from, it might be an HOA or a contracted service within that subdivision that's doing that maintenance. Or 15% is from their possibly public works going around, or 15 respondents are from their public works possibly going around and looking at these basins and opening the lids and checking in the pipes. And then 17 of the respondents are only complaint driven. That means that somebody's calling their office and basically saying, hey, we think we have a problem. The water's not going down, or there's a lot of weeds that aren't being managed and trees are growing up in the basins. So one of the things we rely on under our SSAs or under our stormwater ordinance is SSA, and these are typically called backup SSAs. That's a misnomer because they're backup SSAs, just a regular SSA that's not being levied on. But these SSAs are established as these developments come through the communities. And if the homeowners association were to fail at maintaining their stormwater infrastructure, the community could levy on this SSA and perform that maintenance themselves. So in this question, we asked for total numbers of SSAs since the ordinance inception in 2002. And we have in total of 581 total SSAs that have been established by our various communities. Of these, 11 communities are levying on SSAs and 56 total SSAs are being levied. So a number of our communities are using this mechanism, and that an SSA shows up on your tax bill. That tax bill money goes to your community. Your community is then using that to manage the stormwater basins, as well as flushing out catch basins and making sure everything is properly maintained. So this is in regards to the floodplain. This is again a very important touch point we have, especially with our compliance with IDNR and FEMA, is to make sure all of our communities are following state and federal floodplain standards. And all 25 communities confirmed that they are requiring permits for development in the floodplain, and they have had no issues enforcing the flood protection standards. One of the challenges is that we do look at projects that are adjacent to the floodplain. And the reason for this is that you could have a project, sorry, go back here. You could have a project that's built over here that has a basement over here. And then if there's some sort of connection between that water and your basement, you could have flooding of your basement. So we do have 2 communities that we're going to work with to make sure that they're reviewing those permits that are adjacent to the floodplains. Another very important part of the ordinance is the substantial damage, substantial improvement section. Substantial damage, substantial improvement, it applies to any of our homes that fall within the floodplain. And if the value of the home is exceeded by any kind of damage, that could be wind, it could be tornado, it could be floodwater, it could be fire, or the house is improved greater than 50%, that would be like an addition or gutting the whole inside and redoing the whole inside and all your windows and stuff. You need to meet the flood protection standards. And so we have an example of a house that was elevated down here. You can use this area, this garage area for parking cars and storage. But these have to be flood vented, so the water would flow through this bottom portion of the house and all the utilities and everything is up here protected. So we want to make sure our communities are tracking this when it's coming in with the building permits, and making sure, because we have a 10-year standard, that those improvements are tracked by for maintenance purposes, and it's a lifetime for any kind of permanent improvements to the structure. That they have methods and procedures in place to make sure that they're tracking that. So we did see that 75% of our respondents are coordinating with other departments, mainly the building department, to make sure that they're catching these when they come through for building permits. 21% are using outside consultants, but we did see that 25% of our respondents noted the need for better coordination with in their office. And it was impressive. We did have one developing a GIS tracking layer for these houses. So I think that's great, but also we're going to do some additional communication in regards to that. So in regards to wetlands, we have six communities. Is it 6? Okay, six communities within Kane County are certified with us to issue wetland permits themselves. All the other communities have to go through the county to have their wetland permits issued. So if there's going to be an impact to a wetland area outside of those 6 communities, we receive those permits in our office, and Rob Linke here processes those. So Kane County issued 3 wetland mitigation permits that totaled 0.82 acres of impact in 2024. Two were mitigated through wetland banks, and 1 was mitigated through fee and lieu for a total of $32,000. These are our communities that are authorized to issue the wetland permits. The funds that come in for fee and lieu of wetlands are to be maintained in a separate account, so they can be audited if we need to do that. We can see the Village of Algonquin has had quite a few mitigation funds come in, and they have since 2002 spent $822,000 mitigating wetlands. That means they're creating wetlands within their area to make up for those wetlands that were filled in or lost due to development. So we have some follow-up to do with some of our other communities here to make sure that any funds that they're taking in are properly being notated in their balance books. And then to make sure that those funds are being spent on the mitigation of wetlands. And Rob just gave me the numbers for Kane County, which ours, because we have so many communities that come in through us for wetland permitting. Our wetland permitting fee in lieu of mitigation dollars are $2.2 million to date. And we have created $2.3 million worth of wetland creations, a lot of which has been working cooperatively with our Forest Preserve District. One of the last questions we asked is what additional information should this committee consider in order to improve the implementation of the ordinance? Many of our communities said there was no additional information, but we did have a few respondents that asked for refresher classes and a general forum or frequently asked questions. And so that's something that we definitely as a staff can work towards to make sure that we're all kind of on the same page as we're going through and implementing the ordinance. I think that's my last slide. Okay, any questions on the audit? Nope.
Awesome.
Great. It was a great amount of information that we got back from our communities, and it's great to see all the effort that's being put in to make sure that they're compliant with the ordinance. So may I continue?
Yes, you can.
Thank you. Our next presentation is some of the potential updates and clarifications to the ordinance that we're going to be requesting some comments back from our certified communities, as well as our engineers and wetland specialists, as well as this committee. And the intent with this is then to finalize a draft version of the updates and clarifications that we want to move forward with. So I'm going to turn this over to Ann and Rob to go through the various slides. There's a lot of technical information because we're quoting the ordinance on many of these slides. So we're going to kind of give a higher level layman's term explanation of these changes, and we can dig into the details if there's any questions. Thank you.
Yeah, just stop us if you have any questions or additional comments you want to make. So as Jody said, this is our potential updates and clarifications for you folks to have a look at as soon as I figure out how to use the
Other way.
right? So this is just to review, that's our stormwater ordinance. And then we have a technical manual that's there to help folks understand and implement some of the practices within the stormwater ordinance and updated in 2019. Sorry, folks, ruining all the surprises. So as Jody mentioned, in 2019, we introduced a lower threshold for that best management practice. So for those infiltration trenches or bioswales or rain gardens, where we want an inch of water to infiltrate onto the property when the development reaches 5,000 square feet of impervious. Prior to that, that infiltration practice wasn't required until the site required stormwater detention. Stormwater detention is when we hold back what we call the 100-year storm, or the storm that has a 1% chance of happening in any given year. So we bumped it up. It's now required at 5,000 square feet of impervious, but we had some sites that had already introduced less than 25,000 square feet prior to the 2019. And so their next development may have more than 5,000 square feet, but they had some impervious that was added in between that 2002 date and that 2019 date. And so during COVID, we actually put out a memo for the communities to understand that at the administrator's discretion, any impervious that was added between 2002 and 2019, less than our detention threshold, that you may waive that BMP practice for that impervious. Any impervious added after 2018, once you hit the 5,000 square feet, you have to provide that infiltration practice, that best management practice. But at the administrator's discretion, they could waive that.
Makes sense.
Sorry, I did again. Yeah. Luckily, water rolls down, so I don't have to worry about that for my regular job. So we've just added a footnote to our tables. One of the nice updates that we're kind of proud of in the county is we created these tables for determining the stormwater management triggers, whether or not you need one of those best management practices or stormwater detention basin, or as Jody mentioned, some of those watershed benefit measures for our rural properties. And so we're just adding a footnote to that to say that that's at the administrator's discretion. So you know what? This is, I'm too impatient. Okay, the next is discussing solar. So as you can imagine, in 2018 and then finally in 2019, when we adopted the latest revisions, we were not talking a lot about solar. Any of you folks know we're now talking a lot about solar. And so this was an area where we were silent in the ordinance. And we've talked amongst our community on how other folks are regulating this. Some of our communities are here. Sugar Grove's here today. They've done some solar projects. We've had Burlington, and then we've had numerous in unincorporated Kane County. And because we're silent on this, we wanted to have consideration for the type of impervious that solar adds to a site. And so as part of that, we acknowledge that it grows nice and green under these solar panels, eventually, if we do all our best practices. And so these panels aren't traditional impervious. And we used to use this term disconnected impervious, and then we kind of abandoned it. Well, I'm here to bring it back again for the use for solar panels and say that, yes, they're impervious, but they're a type of disconnected impervious. The water hits it, it runs underneath. We do get that nice green under the panels if everything goes according to plan. And so we're calling that disconnected impervious. And for that, we would like to see that inch of water that we talked about for our best management practices. We'd like to see an inch of water infiltrate into the ground between each row of the panels. And so there's different methodologies to do that. You can model that. The state of Minnesota has done a lot of work and study on this and come up with a pretty simple calculator to determine that effective disconnected impervious. So depending on how you space your panels apart, what type of soil it is, what you're planting there, we can kind of anticipate how much of that inch is getting in there. If you're not getting that inch, we would like you to consider putting in that best management practice. And so that's what this slide is about.
Question.
Yes.
There you go. You said provided everything works as it should, do we know what the, I guess, efficacy or consistency is of these solar panels in operating the way that we want them to? I know they've been going through a lot of iterations and we're all learning as we go.
Yeah, and we are all learning as we go. And so another item that I don't actually have a specific slide for, but I'm glad you mentioned it, is we do want to beef up our technical manual to make sure that we're doing those best practices. Things like pre-vegetating a site before we do that. If we're installing those panels on a slope, we want to make sure at the drip edge that water's not coming off too fast and causing erosion. So there's different techniques to mitigate that, including like stone or a more aggressive plant. So those items really help with the success of the project. So
Actually, I was asking more about the solar panels themselves, where you have the whole field. I mean, there were times, I remember when the wind turbines came out a couple decades ago, and whole fields would just kind of stop working because they're still trying to figure out how they worked. Are what we're seeing now in our fields pretty consistent, the machinery and the mechanisms, so that then the best practices can actually move forward, or do we know that data?
so I'm not a electrical engineer or power engineer, so I'm not here to talk about the effects.
Efficacy.
Yeah, thank you, that word. For solar panels, Jody's done some work, and her department's done some work on that, and we've presented at our environmental committee. So you're welcome to that. And Jody, if you wanted to.
Yeah, and I think what we're seeing is the panels that kind of track the tracking system versus the stationary. That does go into the modeling software that Anne has pointed out. And so you do get a different chance at that vegetation. And that's why we're working through that in the technical manual to make sure that you have the best chance at getting the greatest growth underneath those panels, because you do have, depending on the spacing, depending on the aisles, and depending if they're tracking, you are creating a different environment for different plants by doing that. So what we want to make sure is that we have that deep rooted vegetation, and that it's a dense stand of that deep rooted vegetation. Otherwise, at the end of the day, at the bottom of the hill, you are going to see more water, and that water then is going to carry on downstream. And so making sure that we're being conservative in our evaluation of those panels, and making sure that the vegetation is consistent is going to make sure that we don't have any downstream problems from that.
Thank you.
I may. Linda here. We've had all kinds of headaches with solar, not even getting much into this subject at all. We've heard that, some of the developers throw a bunch of seeds down and nothing grows there at all, or some places are getting overgrown. What level of enforcement do you have, and at what point should you guys be getting involved in a new solar operation?
When the developer is using that vegetation as their best management practice, if that vegetation is not working properly to slow down the water and to promote that 1 inch of infiltration into the ground before it leaves the site, or we're seeing erosion, as Ann pointed out, because you're on a hill and it's coming off the panels, that's a violation of their stormwater permit. And so if they are violating their stormwater permit, the certified community or the county could issue a notice of violation that we're seeing erosion on the site. The water's coming off the site faster than the modeling was showing. And at that point, they would need to adjust the vegetation on the site or build additional best management practice at the downstream end to minimize that water coming off the site. So that's not something that we've encountered yet, but we have some very fresh sites and a lot of them coming through. So I would not at all be surprised if we don't have a few of those issues come up in the near future.
Yeah, as soon as the zoning change takes place in June, you'll have a ton of them because they've been holding back now. The county loses almost any power to turn one down come June. And so there'll be a lot of them.
Mhm.
Are you currently been looking at this, or are you waiting for complaints?
We do inspections before we finalize the permits, and it is 80%.
80%. Yeah, we require 80% at the county. We're requiring 80% vegetative cover of deep rooted native vegetation.
Okay.
And we now, when we know better, we do better. We now know that the best practice is to pre-vegetate the site prior to those panels going up. They don't necessarily put in that nice solar meadow planting to start, but they'll put in a crop of rye or winter wheat, whatever makes sense, so that we're not putting these panels on bare earth now. And those are the types of things that we want to include in our technical manual so that we're all communicating on what those best practices are.
Thank you.
So for the stationary panels, I have seen both in Kane County and in Michigan, for stationary panels, they can select a plant that thrives well in that kind of shade. So I've seen that. I've seen that work too, but for profit reasons, they all rotate. So it's more just like a small, farmer size field of solar. You have to be patient. So as part of this, we are putting forth entering a new type of development. So this is our table 9-81. It goes through stormwater management mitigation measures. So those BMPs, the detention, watershed benefit measures, and we're recommending adding ground mount solar as a method, and thereby requiring a best management practice for the site. And because of that, we want to introduce a definition for that disconnected impervious we talked about. I tried to kind of put in a graphic there to understand that the water comes down and flows through. But depending on the spacing of the road, they may not get that full inch. In fact, none of the sites have probably permitted 10 now. None of them have been able to demonstrate that they get the full inch between the panel rows.
Is that inch a standard here or Minnesota or the inch of infiltration?
Minnesota actually does use an inch. I'm sure they've got areas that use more than an inch. We previously considered 3/4 of an inch for infiltration practice. In 2019, we decided, the technical committee and you folks decided that an inch was a more appropriate infiltration.
Cool.
So that if you get a 1-inch rainfall, it doesn't leave your property.
Yeah. Okay.
The next is just a clarification that is kind of ambiguous in our tables in the floodplain section, and that's to allow we do allow sheds of a certain size. They can't be too big, can't have a high value. There's no washrooms in them. They're not man caves or she sheds or anything like that. They're sheds for parking your lawnmower or maybe your vehicle and your canoe or your boat. So there's very limited uses that you can use for that shed, but you are allowed to build a shed both in the floodplain and the floodway. And our table is not clear that you can either build it so that the bottom of that shed is 1/2 foot above that base flood elevation, or the 100-year flood, or the flood that has a 1% chance of happening in any given year. So you can either elevate that building, or what's considered a better practice for floodplain management is actually to build it at grade and equip it with flood vents. So there's an example, a sketch there, and that's the type of flood vent. We don't necessarily, they don't have to do an engineered flood vent. They can do flood openings in a couple of different ways, but to flood vent it. And in that way, the shed isn't taking up space where we want water to be. So when it rains, you live in the floodplain, it rains, your shed's going to fill up with water. When those floodwaters recede, the water recedes. And so we wanted to put that option in for folks to build sheds in the floodplain and make it clear that that's allowed, and you don't need a variance to build this type of shed that's showing here.
What is the abbreviation BFE?
That's our base flood elevation. And that's the height that we expect the water to get to for, again, we used to say the 100-year storm. Now we say the storm that has a 1% chance of happening in any given year. Yeah. I'm well over 100 years old now. That's just the case. Yeah, in floodplain years, that's right. Okay, and the next are just some minor comments that we've received in a recent review this fall with IDNR and FEMA. And one was we did not have a definition for new construction within our stormwater ordinance. That was inadvertent. So we're adding the standard FEMA definition for new construction. And it's also the definition that's included in Illinois' stormwater model ordinance or floodplain model ordinance. So we're including that. And these are a couple other comments. Our ordinance was reviewed in 2019 and approved by both FEMA and IDNR, but they had a second look at it. There was some new maps that were added. And so they had a second look at the ordinance and pointed out a few revisions that they feel would be appropriate. One is our definition of development. We have a series of activities that don't explicitly say that they are excluded as development outside the floodplain. So we've got the definition of development, and then we'll say, but it doesn't include these things like maintenance on, on a road. If you're putting 2 inches of asphalt on a road, that's, that's maintenance. However, with FEMA, you are not allowed to exclude any activities that are in the floodplain. And so we've updated our definition to make that very clear. The next slide, I'll show you just a few items that we had to add for that. The other one is we had the word or in our definition of substantial improvement, and they preferred that we say and or. So one way of becoming substantially improved, that's where Jody talked about, if you're putting too much money into your house, then FEMA says, okay, and our stormwater ordinance says, okay, now you have to make this a safer place to live. And that first floor has to come up. We want it flood vented underneath that, get all your utilities up. But we also have, and this has been historical through the state of Illinois, we also say if you're adding more than 20% of the floor area, if you're expanding an addition to more than 20%, that is also considered a substantial improvement, and we need to make that home safer. So we had or before, they're recommending and so we're putting that forward. And then the last one was a comment for if you have a project that is going to increase or decrease the base flood elevation for a project, you are required with FEMA regulations to do a letter of map change. And that needs to be completed 6 months, within 6 months after construction. So we didn't have that explicitly laid out. If you read 3 or 4 different sections, you'd see you could paste it together. FEMA wanted to make it more clear. And so we will have it in there to make it more clear that 6 months later, we do need to do that letter of map change, whether we're increasing with our activity or decreasing. That's just the definition of development. Those are the things that are typically excluded, but they're not excluded if they're in the floodplain. The only activity that we didn't adjust there is our agricultural uses. So farming is an appropriate use in the floodplain as long as it doesn't create any fill, grading, or construction of levees. So just a couple. Most of them already called out that it wasn't in the floodplain, but we've made it clear now, except for farming practices. They are defined as development. And then we had the situation where our ordinance needed a little bit more precise language. We talked about development and the standards of building protection and compensatory storage and those types of things. Currently, the ordinance calls out regulatory floodplain. We want to additionally call out the non-riverine floodplain, and that's like our depressional areas. And so we'll have a slight change to our definition, and then in the one section 928A1, we will add so that it's clear that it's non-riverine or regulatory floodplain. And so that's just a bit of bookkeeping there to make sure that folks know that we regulate those natural depressional areas, whether or not they're mapped by FEMA. And I believe I'll pass along. Oh, sorry.
All right, good afternoon. I will be as brief as possible. Ann had covered the topic on depressional storage, and I think that was a good explanation, even though she stole my thunder. That was supposed to be my slide. I was going to talk about depressional storage, modeling, and then wetlands. So we'll go with modeling and wetlands. Again, as had been stated, I know there's a lot of information on here, but at a high level, this is just to point out that when the ordinance was originally adopted and became effective January of 2002, the way in which the stormwater modeling was done specified a specific type of stormwater models that were applicable at that time. And as you can imagine, time has changed. Actually, several of the models that were listed are actually no longer even maintained by the government agencies that prepared them. For example, this HEC1, which is the Army Corps of Engineers stormwater and watershed model, as well as a couple of these other ones. Also, the TR55 or other tabular methods, that's something that we don't allow in our stormwater submittals anymore. When somebody's designing a site that needs a detention basin, we want an actual model that's going to generate that stormwater hydrograph and then route it through the basin so we can see that we're meeting the ordinance as far as the discharge requirements and so on and so forth. So this revision to the ordinance is just to remove those models that are no longer applicable, and then also to add in some of the newer technology that's currently being utilized and that's going to be utilized moving forward. And namely, that is the HEC-RAS software that the Army Corps of Engineers is utilizing, that is adopted and advocated by FEMA to be able to do this, what's called a 2D rain-on mesh. So moving forward, we're going to be able to see a lot more user-friendly applications that will allow for more thorough reviews and a better dissemination of those results by the non-engineers. And so that's the suggested revision that we have here. And then bottom one.
We got it.
There we go. Okay. Patience. The next change is also related to the modeling, and that is the rainfall data that's utilized by those models. You've heard a lot of references made to the 100-year storm or 1% chance event. And so the ordinance was updated in 2019 to reflect new data that was published by the state of Illinois through the Illinois State Water Survey, which was called Bulletin 75. And that utilized through that time in 2020 is when that was actually officially published. We knew it was coming out at the time of the 2019 ordinance, and that relied on new rainfall data that had been analyzed by the State Water Survey to update that Bulletin 70, which I think dated back to, I want to say 1989 or so. So it was using data from prior to that. So the ordinance, we're updating the ordinance now that we know it is officially called Bulletin 75 to take out all the references to Bulletin 70. And then the other addition that we added in is, I think it was a year and a half ago or so, the State Water Survey also put out a what's called Bulletin 76, which is a document that showed the rainfall projections based on different climatic conditions. And so those are even higher rainfall amounts. There was when that data came out, we had received a number of inquiries or questions from the certified communities on whether or not the county was going to switch to this Bulletin 76 instead of the Bulletin 75, which was only a few years old. And the consensus from the input that we received from all the certified communities was that everybody agreed that the best course of action would be to stay with the Bulletin 75, which relies on the historical data and the analysis of that historical data, but put in the ordinance to give the communities the option to request that that the modeling be done for Bulletin 76, kind of like a what if scenario. Again, recognizing that we do in fact have storm events that exceed our published quote 100-year events. As many of you guys have seen, if you watch the news, we've had many events just in the Chicagoland area in the last 2 or 3 years that have well exceeded that 100-year event. So putting that language in there to allow the communities to say, hey, you're designing for this Bulletin 75 that everybody accepts, but we'd also like you to look at the Bulletin 76, essentially those higher storm events. it gives everybody the benefit of being able to see kind of that what if scenario for a more extreme event.
I would just add to Rob that our communities have all been using Bulletin 76 since it came out in 2020.
75.
75, sorry, thank you. 75. And just for the committee's information, the difference between in Kane County between that Bulletin 70 and 75, 70 was about 7.5 inches of rain over a 24-hour period, and Bulletin 75 is about 8.5 inches of rain. So for our area, recognizing these higher intensity storms that we're getting, when they ran through the data, it basically increased our rainfall amount by about 1 inch when we're looking at designing for the future. And 76 goes even further beyond that into some climate change scenarios with significantly higher rainfall rates. And so it gives our communities the opportunity to look at those extreme events, but it doesn't require them to regulate to those extreme events.
So just one point of clarification then. It doesn't require that they regulate to that event, but can they? at
They
Bulletin?
can, yes. The way we would like to word it, everybody is required to use Bulletin 75 now, but they can regulate to it, or they can have the scenarios run for the purpose of evaluation of what might happen in their community.
And do they have to kind of adopt that village-wide then? Or can they pick and choose which developments need to meet the 75, 76?
We're really leaving it up to the administrators and their attorneys to make that determination. If they are going to require that scenario be run within their community for all developments, or they can make I know some of our communities have specific areas that have more significant flooding issues. And so they identify it on a watershed basis. And potentially in that watershed that is more sensitive, they might require within that watershed. But we are leaving that up to the communities to make that determination.
As long as it was known as somebody who works on the other side of this stuff ahead of time, that like this section of, Aurora in this flood prone area designs to this standard, that'd be fine.
Right. And I don't know if you want to add in terms of from King County's perspective, how we would envision utilizing it, but I would imagine we would be requiring designing to the Bulletin 75 and then asking when a developer comes in, depending on the size of the development, if we had a large development in an area where we had sensitive areas, particularly where it's very flat, it would be at that time where they come in for the proposed development that we would say, hey, we're going to ask that you also evaluate for this event as well, just so we have some idea. And again, the ordinance is already written that it gives the communities the power to be able to regulate or put a higher standard in there, depending on, any of the sensitive areas. But the point is fully made too, right? Is the key thing is that a landowner wants to know what the requirements are going to be going in.
Yes, that would be very helpful.
Okay, so moving on. I think we missed one. Did I miss a slide? I think I did skip by. Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, there were two. Yeah, there were two sections. There were two sections on the modeling. This one is related to the floodplain modeling and mapping. And again, this is just to kind of clean up some of the older language, to remove some of the older software packages. Like this software WSP2 is actually put out by the Soil Conservation Service, which hasn't existed for a number of years. And so we're just kind of cleaning those up. And then also recognizing that we're basically only putting in the ordinance for HEC RAS, this HEC RAS software for our floodplain analysis. And the reason for that is because that's what FEMA is almost exclusively adopted. There are other softwares that like departments of transportation will use and things like that. But as far as any regulatory mapping with FEMA and that, ultimately it's all being done by HEC RAS. And then also, and in a future Stormwater Committee, I'm sure we'll be giving a presentation to you on the countywide flood studies project that King County's working on, where we've actually developed these 2D HEC RAS models for the entire county. They're in a draft format right now. And that's another tool that we'll make available to both the communities and developers as well to be able to utilize. So that's kind of where we envision that going there. And again, if there is other software that is to be used, the ordinance currently does have a provision in there, as you see at the very bottom, where a developer does have, can propose an alternative option, and it just needs to be approved by the administrator ahead of time. Okay, all right, so let's talk about wetlands briefly. So one of the clarifications that we are looking to make is a clarification in how the fee in lieu is determined. So as everybody knows, the wetlands are regulated in Kane County, and we want to minimize the amount of impacts to wetlands that are filled in. So if a wetland is filled in as part of a development, there's mitigation that has to be done for that. And the mitigation can be done in one of three ways. The most expensive and probably arduous would be to build wetland mitigation on site or buy adjacent property and construct a new wetland. You can also buy wetland mitigation credits, or what we call wetland credits, from a mitigation bank. There's a number of banks that exist throughout the county where they've recreated or constructed new wetlands, and then they sell those credits to developers that are impacting wetlands. And then finally, there is a fee in lieu. So a developer can also choose to just make a payment to the county or to one of those 6 authorized communities in order to pay for that wetland mitigation. The challenge that we have right now is that we have no wetland credits available in any of the wetland mitigation banks throughout the county. And so folks are paying fee in lieu, either if they're in one of those 6 communities, they're paying it to those communities, or they're paying fee in lieu to the county. And the way the ordinance is currently set up is there's kind of a complicated process to calculate what that fee in lieu rate is. And it was set up originally, the way the wording was set up for fee in lieu was because we were trying to direct everyone, if at all possible, to buy wetland credits, because we'd rather people be paying money into a bank where there's a large amount of wetlands. It's one area, as opposed to kind of building individual wetlands. And the county doesn't really want to be in the business of collecting the wetland fee in lieu money, because then we have to go out and build new wetlands. So, which we are doing, but we would prefer that that work through a wetland mitigation bank. And so how we've been handling this over the last several years, where we've had wetland mitigation banks not have any credits available, is we've asked the community, or they asked the developers to obtain 3 or more quotes from the mitigation banks of what their last credit sold for. And then we are setting the fee in lieu cost per acre as the average of those 3 or more wetland mitigation banks. Well, so every time somebody impacts a wetland, we're asking them to go out and determine, get those 3 costs and then come back to us. And so what we'd like to do, given that while there may be some wetland mitigation banks opening up with new credits in the future, we also know that we're going to kind of go back and forth with not having any available. What we'd like to do is put a change to the ordinance, query all of the wetland banks in the county, find out what their latest credits sold for, and then we'll establish that amount on January 1st. It makes it much easier for the development committee, because then they know January 1st, this is what the fee in lieu costs would be if the wetland credits are not available. So that's that proposed change. The next one is a revision to the ordinance regarding wetland buffer. So if wetlands are impacted, there has to be a buffer that's established. So if you're building a development and you have detention, you're going to encroach close to a wetland, you have to provide a wetland buffer. If you actually fill in the wetland, we have wetland mitigation in place, and that's very well defined, as we were talking earlier. But if you don't encroach into the wetland itself, you have to provide a buffer. But the ordinance actually has a little bit of a loophole where there's no way for a developer to mitigate if they can't achieve the buffer requirement. And so this proposed ordinance revision is to establish a way in which a buffer can be mitigated. So if they're getting close to the wetland, they're filling in that buffer, but they can't meet those minimum distance requirements. We're basically pulling a page out of what the Army Corps does for their wetland mitigation banks. And then we're saying we'll give them one of two options. They can either pay a fee in lieu to the community at a rate of 1/4 of that wetland mitigation fee, or they can, again, as it says here, is at the discretion of the director or the certified community, for every acre of wetland buffer that they can't provide, that they can work in an adjacent area to do an enhancement of an adjacent wetland at a 1-to-1 ratio. So again, this just gives, kind of closes that loophole so that because what had happened is we've had a couple of applicants that came in where they couldn't provide that wetland buffer, and the only mechanism in which to resolve that, it would actually be to come back to the Stormwater Committee for a variance. And so, which obviously they chose not to go through that process and to find another way, but this would give them, again, people that are developing that have unavoidable impacts into a wetland buffer, another means of being able to accomplish their project. And this is the very last one, I promise. And this is just adding to the definition of a wetland impact. So currently a wetland impact is defined as any kind of direct impact caused by dredging or filling, which seems pretty obvious. If you're going to fill in a wetland, you're going to dig an area out, that's considered impact. The current ordinance also defines impact if a development is going to significantly change the hydrology of the wetland in terms of you're going to discharge way more water into that wetland that went there before, or if you're developing around the wetland and you're cutting off the flow of water to that. And so that's very well defined. But one of the things that we found over the last several years is that we have run into a couple of situations here in the county specifically where there was an illicit discharge or a chemical spill, such as like a gasoline spill, into a wetland. So there was no fill and it wasn't a change in hydrology, but that illicit discharge or that chemical spill actually resulted in an impact to the wetland, and in particular, the remediation work that was needed in order to clean up that spill required that wetland be significantly disturbed. And so we wanted to add this definition onto it. So basically, there's now 3 points instead of 2 that would define a wetland impact. So that would be any impact from a non-stormwater discharge into a wetland or the impacts caused by the resulting remediation activities. And I believe those are all of the change. Oh, I'm sorry. One last one on a wetland. And this is just a change actually to the, or clarification in the technical manual. And this is how wetland impacts are determined. If you have a wetland that has a very low quality, has a floristic quality index less than 7, a person that is impacting that wetland is not required to mitigate it if they're going to take that low quality wetland and basically build a natural stormwater basin with wetland plants in it within the footprint of that wetland. That doesn't have to be mitigated. However, that counts if there are other wetlands on the site that they are going to be impacting. You have to add up all of those wetland impacts in total. And once you get to 0.1 acres, then you have to do mitigation. And so this is just a clarification that they would have to do mitigation if all the sum total of all wetland impacts was greater than 0.1 acres. However, if say 0.05 acres was a wetland with a FQI greater than 7, and then 0.05 acres was one of these lower quality wetlands that was going to be mitigated with an on-site basin, they wouldn't have to do mitigation for 0.1. They would only have to pay mitigation for the 0.5.
The FQI being the floristic quality index. It's just a measure of the plants that are in that wetland. So the higher your number, the higher the quality of the wetland.
So in layman's terms for that one,
The layman's terms.
go back to the last slide. It's if it's of a certain quality or higher, then
Yeah, so well, all of the wetlands, I guess the clarification on this is all of the wetlands that are impacted go into determining whether or not you meet that 0.1 acre threshold in which you would have to, do actual mitigation, pay money, fee in lieu, wetland mitigation, bank credits or whatnot. But what happens is we've had situations where Some of those wetlands are these low quality where they're going to build a naturalized detention basin. And so we can subtract those out from the total.
Perfect.
So, which again makes sense. And we're trying to be, developer friendly on here, recognizing that the ordinance says that they need not mitigate those to begin with. So.
Thank you.
Okay. Does the committee have any questions or concerns with any of the proposed modifications?
I was just going to ask these questions, but they're the next step question, but it's. okay.
Yes. So we do always, when we're looking at ordinance changes, like to coordinate very closely with our engineers and our certified communities, and make sure that we're all on the same page before we move any kind of language forward. And so what we want to do is to take this presentation and create a memo from those slides that you saw. And we'll send that information out to our certified communities as well as our engineers, FEMA and IDNR, and we'll solicit any kind of feedback and comments from them. If we're seeing or hearing that we're getting a lot of pushback on any single slide that we presented, that looks like it might need some additional work, we can pull that out, or if we can see if we can work through those challenges with those members that are actually providing us comment, we can do that as well. So it's going to be a bit of a back and forth, so that we're sure that everybody is kind of on the same page before we move things forward. Once we have all those comments addressed, what we will do is finalize the revised ordinance language. So we're going to be taking those ordinance sections and the actual language that's in the ordinance and marking that up. So we have one document that it's a lot of words, but it includes all those slides and all the actual pages that will need to be modified within the ordinance language. It then in our ordinance, it goes through the procedure by which we would adopt those changes. So we have to have a public 45-day review and comment period that goes out to everybody. So those changes are published. They also will send them directly to our certified communities and our engineers again, and to IDNR and FEMA, and make sure that there's no comments on those. The next step after that 45-day review period, we will receive those comments as well as open it in this committee to a public hearing. So this committee would meet again. We would have the comments that we received on those changes in front of you, as well as open the mic for any of the engineers or communities that wanted to comment, as well as any public that wants to come to that public hearing. Once you close the public hearing, if everything looks good, you can then take action in the form of an ordinance to pass on to the county board for adoption. If there's anything that comes out of that public hearing that we want to look at or we want to pull out, we can do that as well and send only the items we want to onto the county board. Any questions?
You have a timeline in mind?
We'd like to make sure that we're all on the same page. So I would say we're probably, by the time we get back here for any kind of public hearing with the 45 days, plus if we say we give maybe like a 60-day period before that to kind of go back and forth, we're looking at probably 3 to 4 months. And so we want to make sure that we're all on board. So I'm guessing probably early summer-ish, midsummer-ish, we would be back here for that public hearing.
When we rewrote the ordinance, we kind of built a coalition of folks that were outside of the municipalities. Do you see any value in reaching out to those groups? I know the farmers were included. I know developers were included.
Yes, we still have an email group that was created. Some of the people might have changed and moved, but we can certainly shoot it out to that same group. We might get some bounce backs, but it's always better, I think, to include more. And a lot of people aren't looking for these notifications that, things are changing. And so I'd like to get it in front of as many people as early as possible.
Cool. Thank you. All right. Anything else for staff or any new business? I don't know if I can do this at a county meeting. Is there any, I know we have several representatives in the room here today. Did you have any initial comments that you'd like to make on the presentation? Perfect. All right. All right. With that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Just point of order. did we approve the meetings from the April 12th?
Yes.
We did. Okay. I don't know where my head.
Linda will move adjournment.
Leonard will second.
All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed?